Hi everybody, my name's Finegankruckemeyer. I'm a playwright. I've currently got my phone balanced quite precariously on a stack of boxes, so we'll see what happens. If I disappear and you get a view of the ceiling, then I'll try to rectify it as quickly as possible. I'm writing by the invitation of the lovely Currency Press team because recently they published this anthology called For We the Young, which is 5 plays that I wrote for young audiences. And the artwork has been beautifully created by my friend Andy Ellis, who's worked with me on a number of plays in the past. And they just did a really beautiful job of creating this lovely document, which is really touching to have on my bookshelf. So they've asked me to speak a little bit about the plays within the anthology, to give some context around how they were created and the lives they've had prior to existing in print in this way. So there are 5 plays and they're all for young audiences, and my writing runs the gamut. So sometimes I write for 5-year-olds and people sitting down in their first class theatre audience, or maybe being taken by a parent or grandparent or guardian, through to teenagers who are maybe encountering, it could be a first piece of theatre, or maybe they've had some experience of sitting in audiences before. And then I also write on occasion for adults, but primarily for young audiences. So the 5 works are My Robot, Love, The Snow, Where Words Once Were, and then a really long titled one called This Girl Laughs, This Girl Cries, This Girl Does Nothing. So Love is, My Robot is about a girl who feels very familiar with the life she knows, the friends she has, the environment she's grown up in, and then from that point of comfort, she's picked up and transplanted to a new community. Her parents move, ostensibly for work, and so she suddenly finds herself in an Australian beachside community and feels very isolated and very distanced from everything that she found familiar, and that was kind of her comfort, her rock. Prior to. So she does possess this wonderful, clever mind, and she has this ability to work with mechanical things and to create things from nothing, which scares and befuddles her lovely, well-meaning father, because he never knows what she'll create next. And what she does create next is a robot, the titular My Robot. This character comes into being because she finds a typewriter and some words of instruction in the sense that the robot wishes to be built, and so she assembles this automaton, and the two slowly become friends, and in doing so they find a way to navigate this new place together. Love is kind of the opposite. It's about a kid who's really familiar with the community he exists in, and there is where the story takes place. So he has this great sense of his environment, his mum who he lives with, who drives the local milk float, and his legion of friends and community members and elders and the people around him in his life who he knows very well. And the schism that upsets his life is that an impending unnamed disaster threatens his community. And so he takes it upon himself, he sets out to find the love luggage of everybody he lives amongst. So those certain things which people might hold dear and were an impending storm to threaten you or your community or your house, what is that one thing that you would save? So he decides that he will be the knight in shining armour and go around and collect these things in his mum's milk float, so as to kind of save the day, or at least save a little bit of their day, of the lives of the people he cares about. And in doing so, he goes on all these historical journeys, kind of finding out what their lives were like and why these small things have such sentimental value to them. So it's a high stakes story, but really about those intimate, heartfelt, kind of precious things that we hold dear, which ultimately, in my mind, is people and community, and that's kind of the point he reaches. The Snow is about 2 neighbouring communities who are at war. It's kind of told in a Brothers Grimmsian kind of German forested feel. It was written for a company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which has a large Teutonic history and is also very familiar with snow and chilly climates. And so it sees this boy who's kind of a bit furtive, a bit fearful, but again with a big mind. I like these kind of protagonists who kind of at face value kind of quite unassuming, and then have a lot of things in their kind of toolkit. So he sets out to try to help this community, which is again being threatened, but it's also at war with its neighbouring population. So there are two things challenging it, and all the bravest and toughest people from his small town decide that they will vanquish whatever it is that's causing the problem, and they begrudgingly take him along because he's a mouthy little kid who kind of wants to go on the adventure too. Very quickly they're taken out of the equation, but with no spoilers, and so it's left to him and a mute giant sidekick who carries the luggage to solve the problem and navigate a whole bunch of problems along the way, and eventually hopefully find a solution to what's beleaguering his town and the one beside. Where Words Once Were is a dystopian future-focused piece, kind of for the later edge of children and then more for teenagers, and it's about the world having been reduced to one gigantic city because of escalating climate issues in the world. And within this one city, it's a heavily policed state and population, because so many people have been flung together in this quite uncompromising way. So the powers that be have decided that 1,000 words can only exist. It's an amalgam of lots of the languages that were brought in from all these visiting communities, and so you can only speak these 1,000 words. And if you were to speak more, then you would be punished. And the way you would be punished is you would be disappeared from society. You would become effectively invisible to society. And this is a love story. It's about a boy who, though he's not meant to, he sees one of the disappeared, one of the girls whose family member uttered a forbidden word. And so he was disappeared, and through his bloodline, she became vanished as well. But this boy can't accept those rules because love is bigger than that. And so he sees her. And it's about this burgeoning love story at this kind of moment in time when teenagers may begin to fall in love, told against this backdrop of a quite harsh dystopia, and always with language at the heart of it. The actual provocation I got from the commissioning company, which was the Kennedy Center for the Arts in Washington, D.C., was to make language the main character. And I loved that as a provocation. So I thought what I would do is try to make language also the victim of the piece, and try to see how I might champion it. Finally, This Girl Laughs, This Girl Cries, This Girl Does Nothing. It's had lots of lives around the world. It began its life in Argentina. My friend Solange had a theatre company in Buenos Aires, and she invited me to come across and to write a work for her ensemble. So I created these 3 female protagonists who are identical triplets, except they're not identical, because as humans, even though externally they look the same, they're cut from different cloth. They're different folk, and so they are abandoned in the wilderness, a fairy tale beginning, by their dad, and then they have to set themselves out into the world, either confidently or begrudgingly, or kind of choosing more to stay where they are and watch the world come to them. So these 3 very different sisters encounter 3 very different journeys as they grow up over 20 years before circumnavigating a planet and meeting again in the same spot, in that same snowy forest as women. So that's the story I quite presumptuously wrote as a beardy guy, but yeah, there we go. So the next question was, what was the inspiration for these works? And they all had different amounts of provocation given to me. So the provocation about language for Where Words Once Were was lovely in its poetic form. And it was actually a poet friend, Kim Peter, who gave me that provocation. And so I could kind of do with that what I wanted to. It was an instruction, but it was one which was afforded a lot of space, which was lovely. My robot came from a conversation with the director, Matt Edgerton, at Barking Gecko Theatre Company, about this notion of a robot existing on stage as one of the performers in the piece. And so this is a 3-hander when it's performed by that wonderful company, and one of the characters is literally a robot, which somebody far, far cleverer than me has literally built and brought into being. It's quite amazing. So this is essentially a journey about somebody creating the confidant they need. So the robot is more an extension of her, of the protagonist. And yeah, it was born from that idea of how we might create the robotic person that we need in a time of hardship, and then the story just unfolded from there. He gave, again, a lot of permission, like all the really lovely invitations do. Love was, it began at Terrapin Puppet Theatre, and it was about love. That was the provocation. It was going to be called Love, and they said make it a work about love. And so I thought about who for me typifies love, and it's a love of a partner, a love of a family, a love of a community, and all these different circles that we exist within, and how we might somehow convey each of those loves. So I try to place the titular characters in each of those roles. He's romantically beginning to have feelings for a girl in the community. He's, as a family member, he's in love with his mum and dad, one present, one absent, and he's trying to express those feelings. As a community member, he feels love for this population he exists within, and he wants to protect and save them all with the valour and the bravery of a child, which is quite lovely to watch. And then these objects, you know, how we manifest love, how we attach love to things which to another person might be seemingly insignificant, but because of our relationship with them, they take on a poetic, a greater quality. So it's a story about love. And the snow was really a tip of the hat to those fairy tale stories that I loved as a kid, where children, or child characters are set off into the great unknown, and there are these kind of Germanic forests, and there's the potential for witches and for giants and for mean animals, and it's got all of these tropes and all these references which we know from these stories, but is just kind of afforded a new identity in this story created. Again, Jeff Frank, the director who I chatted with throughout in America, he gave this lovely sense of see where the world unfolds, and we'll bring it into being, and write things that feel impossible, and I'll find the answers. And that's lovely, and in the production since, I think directors like that sense of permission, that they can manifest things as they see fit. And finally, This Girl Laughs it was really just born of the ensemble that I met by being in Argentina with this lovely collection of actors and my friend the director. We talked about ideas, and I felt that I had to write a story because I was halfway across the world creating it. I wanted to make it about traveling the world and about how we might grow up over the years in motion. Some people grow up in their spot, like in Love. You know, you sense that the main character, he's undergoing this huge evolution, but it's happening right at his doorstep. For these triplets, it's more a sense of being untethered, being sent off into the world and discovering who you are along the way. Why do I write for children is the next question that I was given. I write for all audiences, and I'm actually not too prescriptive. When I'm writing a story, even if I know it's for a children's theatre company, a youth theatre company, I don't actually try to do young audiences the I believe disservice of saying, okay, this is specifically for young audiences, because it makes me curtail my own bravery of ideas. It makes me a bit more sensitive and a bit more protective, as I think any adult in society wishes to be when encountering a child audience. You know, you want to in some way be careful about the level of information you're providing them, or how high the stakes are, what the risks are, and what they might be able to achieve, and when an adult might come along and save the day, as is the way that we would expect a healthy society to work. And so I had to set aside these thoughts and notions and place them in situations of great comparative peril, but also give them the tools and the respect that suggest that they would be able to thwart these huge enemies or circumstances, and they would prove themselves to be great. And it's in the proving of that the characters, I think, really shine and show themselves. So I try to write with a sense of permission for them, and then invariably those child protagonists, they step up and they become far braver than I would have had allowed them to be if I'd been safeguarding them all the way through. So I write for that exercise. I write for that combative exercise about what we give a child audience permission to see and a child character permission to experience. I also like, for many audiences, it's their first time encountering a work of theatre, and I think that's a lovely honour to be able to put a story in front of them, and we all know what this sense of watching a piece of theatre is, where you, for a moment, you're not in your seat anymore and you're experiencing something, you're experiencing a story, and then you snap back in and you've been sitting in a theatre for a while and that time has disappeared, and maybe empathetically you've gone on a journey, and how lovely that is. So that's always really nice to be privy to and to offer an audience. And the final question is, what's the difference between writing for adults and kids? And I think I could let it be very different. As I alluded to before, I could stymie or curtail the things that I feel permission to write, or I could kind of set that notion aside and I could see where the story needs to go. Obviously, in terms of the protagonist, I'd usually make them younger so that they feel like a peer to the children watching the show, or the teenagers watching the show. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I tried to not make it too big a difference, and allow them to come to the party as willing, brave theatre goers in their own right. So that's my answers. Thanks very much for listening, and if you do get this lovely book from Currency, I really, really hope you enjoy it. Cheers.